PTF back here with some exclusive YouTube content for Breeders' Cup and In the Money Media. On this show, we're going to talk about horses we're really looking forward to run at the Breeders' Cup. We did this last year, and there were some high-priced winners actually involved. But this is less about tipping and more about just looking ahead to the excitement that awaits in a few weeks' time. And to do that with us, I made it sound like I came up with the high-priced horse that we talked about last year. It wasn't me. It was this woman. It was Jessica Paquette. Jessica, what's going on?
Happy almost Breeders' Cup. It's the best time of the year. You know, pumpkin spice lattes and Breeders' Cup. That's all fall is for us.
Where shall we begin? When I ask you this question, I have a feeling I know the answer, but when I ask you this question about horses you're particularly looking forward to seeing, where did your brain go?
And the first horse is Didia. She's probably my favorite horse as a fan in the past decade, which is kind of a pretty big statement. There are occasionally, you know, when we work in the industry for so long, it's not that we get numb or desensitized to any of it, but great horses come and go, and there's always another big superstar. But a horse that really captivates you and pulls the things that remind you of why you're a fan, those are so rare. And Didia, to me, has reminded me exactly why I love this sport.
Go back to your beginning with Didia. What was it that first attracted you?
So I was in the paddock at Colonial Downs 2 summers ago now, having the summer of my life in Virginia. And this little unassuming bay mare walked into the paddock. And she looked maybe 70% fit. She had come in with this great Argentinian record, but you never really know how those are going to translate. And there was something about this filly from the moment she walked into the paddock where she breathed different air. And I said, oh, this one's really, really special. And she ran. She didn't win by a gaudy margin, but she won. And to me, she looked like a horse who wasn't even close to 100%. Her next start stepped up a little bit, and I was so convinced that she was so good. And she proved me right. Again, she wasn't even, I think, 1,000% fit then. And she showed her heart and her class. And that was it. I was a big fan. I maintained from those first 2 races that she was going to be a domestic star. And she's had some setbacks along the way, certainly, but she has proven me right every time she's stepped into the starting gate.
Form figure wise, it's unbelievable. I mean, just the one second in the domestic action, and
with no pace. That was like, right. And that race was so against her running style.
Yep. And then, most recently being able to score in the Rodeo Drive just last weekend, beating the extremely well thought of Anisette. So, at this point, I don't know if I can ask you to be objective about Didia, given your fandom, but objectively, what do you see as her chance in a race like the filly and mare turf with the invaders? I feel like you chose that word carefully when you said among the domestic. What about in an international stage like the Breeders' Cup?
I mean, she's an international star already, too. Those Group 1 races in Argentina are still Group 1 races. So I think her form measures up against anyone who's coming into the starting gate. And while the European invaders are certainly going to be tough, she has a couple of things really going for her. She has shown she can run over the Santa Anita turf course, and she did so really, really well. It's a stylish performance. And sometimes these horses do have that intangible. She wants it. You can see when Vincent Chamonix asked her, she pins her ear, she swishes her tail. She knows what the job is. And she said, you are not coming by me.
That type of class is something that, as a numbers guy, it frustrates me that I can't quantify it, but I always make a note when a horse shows that intangible ability of wanting to win. Didia certainly has it all throughout the first of mine. I'm looking at my list now, and I didn't plan this, but I think this is because of the blessed position I'm in to be able to see so many of the domestic runners throughout the year in the U.S. When it comes to Breeders' Cup, I do tend to lean towards a lot of the foreign runners who I'm going to have the opportunity to see again. One, U.S. based, but career highlight came at Royal Ascot is Crimson Advocate, who I'm really looking forward to seeing how she's developed and hoping that she's going to make a big run in a race like the juvenile turf sprint. This is a race that is relatively new, obviously in the overall Breeders' Cup calendar, but I like the way that it's such an international race right out of the blocks. I want to see how Crimson Advocate's going to perform there. If you don't have any thoughts on Crimson Advocate per se, just curious to get your thoughts in general on this juvenile turf sprint that I think is a real positive for the sport and for the Breeders' Cup.
I mean, without even looking, Wesley Ward will have 3 or 4 contenders in there. Kind of that's a no-brainer. But I think it's an interesting way to start the day. And anything that makes this more of an international event, I find fascinating. It brings in a lot of different European horses and also some really precocious domestic ones as well. I love I love a good turf race. What can I say?
For the next one, this is one that we both latched onto, but I'll let you begin in terms of talking about her. What I think one of the most interesting stories at this year's Breeders' Cup is going to be seeing the daughter of multiple Breeders' Cup winner, Beholder, Tamara, take her place in the juvenile fillies. You wanted to talk about her too, so I'm clearly not on an island here thinking this is the story of the BC. But how big of a story is this? How much of our horse racing marketing muscle should we get around Tamara this year?
I think we could really put some weight behind her. This is the kind of horse that can really bring fans in. I think she has all of the goods. She's brilliantly special. And there's something to be said for a homebred with the same connections. And Richard Mandela trained her mother, and she is, by all accounts, her mother's little mini clone. And also just how remarkable it is for a Breeders' Cup champion mare to produce a horse that is of this caliber. We've seen so many of these great mares just kind of not be able to replicate themselves or their success in the breeding shed. I mean, Zenyatta is obviously the first that comes to mind. Her offspring really have not lit the racing world on fire, but Beholder to be able to produce such a mini version of herself. And I would have loved to see this filly race one more time before the juvenile fillies. I do like seeing them actually race as a fan, but I'll take what I can get. She was just spectacular last time. And the pictures that Alex Evers got of her and Beholder side by side are remarkable.
So cool. And because Beholder was able to go, I can't remember if it was 6 or 7, but it was definitely a sprint distance to the juvenile. It just gives me that much more hope that Tamara can emulate that. And this is one too where I just trust implicitly Mandela to call all the shots. Yeah, it would have been fun to see her one more time going into it, but I'm sure they've decided that this is what's best for the overall development. And I'm not going to question a guy like that. But we can pivot from one. Oh, I want one more point on Tamara is that I feel like with this last weekend's action, yeah, we saw some talented fillies, but it does seem like Tamara might be of just a different class. Certainly looking at time figures coming out of the weekend, assuming she can handle the extra ground, which on her blood, there's no reason why
there's
she
no
should.
reason. Her blood, her build, everything about her screams a distance of ground. And to the point of like Richard Mandela is going to forget more about horses than I'll ever know. They're clearly playing a long game here. The championship 2-year-old season is lovely. They're trying to develop this filly into a 3-year-old and hopefully a 4-year-old. So, take the time now and you have a better horse at the end of it.
Let's go to one that does not have this issue of not running too much. We're going to go look to overseas again to talk about a runner called Paddington. Now, Paddington had been really looking earlier in the season. His campaign had precisely matched that of Giants Causeway, which briefly gave me the hope that maybe they'd think about doing something really interesting and run him in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic. It doesn't sound like that's going to happen. It sounds like it's going to be the Breeders' Cup Mile for Paddington. It's going to be a super competitive race, but I love the idea of getting a horse that's been so tested across a proper old school European campaign, coming here not over raced, with some time now, almost as if they said, okay, maybe that was one race too many in a row. Let's freshen up and attack some fall targets. I'm not 100% sure if we're going to see him Champions Day, but then I do believe regardless of what happens there, we're going to see him for the Breeders' Cup, and I'm looking forward to it. Breeders' Cup Mile, to me, Jess, one of my favorite races in all the Breeders' Cup. I just think it's so exciting because it's this mile race, but tactically it so often plays out like a sprint where they are just running every step of the way. And I think you see some thrilling results, and it puts on a stage for horses to deliver these true grade 1 international performances. I can only imagine, as a turf racing fan such as myself, it's one that you hold high in esteem as well.
It is often the site of some of the most memorable and some of my favorite Breeders' Cups. I am currently stuck doing, I think it's called girl math in my head. The Giants Causeways Classic was 23 years ago. How did that happen? When did that happen? How did we get this old? How was that 23 years ago? I'm really stuck on that. And that classic is one of my favorite races. Both of Tisnow's classics have a real soft spot in my heart, but I mean, that 2000 classic at Churchill, everything good about the Breeders' Cup.
Let's be clear. You must have been. I remember it well. I was in my 20s. I was at the Meadowlands. You were in single digits, I presume. Watching
I was not,
TV,
though. I'm going
to
send my dermatologist a fruit basket. So thank you. I believe I was in Long Island on Susie Rasher's couch watching that classic.
That's excellent. Tying it into the fine photographer Susie, whose work we featured with credit many times.
As you better with credit.
Absolutely. Let's get to another one you're really looking forward to. Let's talk about the distaff and your thoughts on this race.
I think the distaff and the filly and mare division in general has shaped up to be really contentious, and Clairiere is getting a little bit overlooked. I don't think this filly has lost a step. I think she's been at the mercy of some short fields and some pace scenarios that maybe haven't worked to her favor. And to me, she's a good example of what a horse can develop into if you let them. You know, she didn't retire early. She was allowed to physically mature, and she is a powerhouse. She's a beast. And Steve Asmussen always has them 110% on these big days. Clairiere, I think, will get ideally the pace set up. There should be, you have to imagine it'll be a pretty quick front end, especially at Santa Anita.
Well, and that's right. I mean, one thing that's really been great about the way this division has emerged is the presence of these front runners like Idiomatic. I'm spacing on the horse that won in New York over the weekend, too, in wire-to-wire fashion. I think a runner like Clairiere is going to get a race shape where she might really be able to show her best. And as we know, her best, very, very good. So we'll see how it plays out for Clairiere. I will say I'm interested. I'll do a sort of a bonus piggyback one to get us to 10 runners here and say I'm really curious to see what Idiomatic is going to do next, and see if raising in class again, if that same front running style, has some of Idiomatic's rise been a result of Nest maybe having seen her best days at the races behind her? Or is she going to be able to back up that performance against this truly world-class crew? We're going to find out on Breeders' Cup Day. Another one I'll mention quickly, looking at the turf sprint division, I was so happy to see Highfield Princess get back to winning ways in France over Arc Weekend. And this is one who I feel like we didn't get to see the best of last year. What a great story it would be with that experience under the belt to be able to come back and get back to winning ways and go out a winner at the Breeders' Cup. Just love the whole Highfield Princess story is so cool. And just another example of a horse that comes from, this idea that good horses can come from anywhere. It's not just, the top outfits are always going to have super exciting horses. And we've talked about several of them on the show, but it's also great to see stories like that of Highfield Princess making its way to the biggest stage of the Breeders' Cup. What do you think about that idea that maybe having had the experience at the Breeders' Cup last year, even though it didn't all go well, could lead to it being a little bit easier? Could you see the equine mind working that way, where when something's a little bit more familiar, the second time it becomes a little bit easier?
To a certain extent, but this isn't, she's not really getting an entire do-over here. It's an entire, Keeneland and Santa Anita are entirely different animals.
That's a good point.
And so it is going to be a very new experience at a packed Santa Anita on Breeders' Cup, a very different turf course, very different climate, a lot of different things, but maybe those things suit her more.
Right. And we're going to hopefully get our chance to find out. We have two more horses to talk about. They're both in the Classic. I'll go first. I'm looking forward to seeing what Japan sends over. I almost mentioned Songline, but I feel like we talked about Songline enough in another video. And I seriously am very interested in that potential of the Songline Paddington clash in the mile. I want to talk about Ushba Tesoro, the Dubai World Cup winner. So we already know dirt and 10 furlongs work. Made a nice return to the races. We saw what the Japanese were able to do at the Breeders' Cup 2 years ago. I'm assuming we're going to see a robust contingent. But I think that with everybody falling all over themselves to bet the three-year-olds currently are the top three in the betting market for the Classic, looking for a little bit of a stranger like Ushba Tesoro, might make sense. And I always love the enthusiasm and the energy that the Japanese participants bring. And obviously, it's just a fantastic racing culture over there as well. And great to get them involved with the thought of, I love the idea of fantasizing about more cross-pollination between the Japanese jurisdiction and the North American jurisdiction as time goes on. Really, Jess, I just want the opportunity to bet into those giant pools week in, week out. But I know you have a non-3-year-old thought as well for the Classic, and we'll wrap with that.
We'll wrap with that, but to your point, I mean, I think the Japanese owners and breeders have been playing chess while the rest of us have been playing checkers. And it is just a matter of time before they win the Derby. They continue to dominate on our biggest days because they have been breeding for soundness, for durability, for stamina, and breeding for these true classic distance dirt type horses. And that is not an overnight success. And they have stayed the course, and we're seeing those results come to fruition more and more each year.
Yeah,
that said,
it's been decades in the making, to your point about chess and planning ahead. And I'll just throw in before we go on, when you mentioned the Derby, I do want to mention also that Dharma Sotogake is meant to be potentially coming back as well. And he was my Derby horse. So I have to study up. I'm not as up on him and what's been going on as I am Ushba Tesoro, but I'm not dismissing anything the Japanese send over out of hand.
And I am going with a little bit more of a domestic angle. The Dutrow comeback tour continues, and I think White Abarrio, sort of the classic winner we're all going to get this year. I think this is the comeback story that racing in 2023 is having, and he certainly has been in good order, has really rounded into form and hit his best ride. And sometimes you just have to go with your gut, and I think he's going to win the Classic this year.
I'll tell you what, he got a big boost from Zandon, who looked every inch of a Classic contender himself.
Yeah, way to finally show the potential that I've been chasing for like 2 years, Zandon.
I know. He had been the king of finding one better on the day, and then suddenly looked like this. It was a grade 2, but looked like a grade 1 horse. But I'll tell you what, he's a grade 1 horse that White Abarrio made look pretty average at Saratoga. And, in the hands of Dutrow, I don't think the layoff is a big concern. We've seen him, these type of moves before.
Look at him off the layoff.
That's right back to grade 1 success with 10 years on the pine. But yeah, it also does feel like a race where it could shape up for him. But I think the most interesting part about all of these ideas, and we'll see, maybe the pari-mutuel markets won't be the same as the international. But right now, it's everybody is all about Arabian Night and Archangelo and Go Rocket Ride, and these demonstrably faster on figures, older horses. If we can get the kind of prices on them that we're seeing right now, I think you and I are going to will likely be winning or losing together come Breeders' Cup Day.
It's nice to do that with friends.
Great stuff, Jess. Always appreciate you. We'll have you back on soon to do some more stuff, but I wanted to get a chance to check in and say hello and keep up the great work behind the mic there at Parks, and we will be talking soon.
Good luck, everyone.